right, so you want to understand the 2017 NYC truck attack, not just what the headlines told you. We're going to really dive deep into this whole thing today, using the Wikipedia article as our guide.
Yeah.
But we're going to go way beyond just the facts and figures. We're going to try to get into, like, what actually turns someone into a terrorist.
Right.
And the lasting impact of something like this on an entire city.
It's a chilling example, I think, of how violence can really shatter that sense of safety that we have, you know, especially in a place like New York City.
Yeah.
Think about it, you know, Halloween 2017, it's a beautiful fall day, Hudson River Greenway, bustling with people, cyclists, runners, everybody just out enjoying the weather.
Right.
And then suddenly a rented pickup truck turns onto the path and basically becomes a weapon.
Yeah. And this wasn't just like some guy lost control of his car. The article details how this truck sped up. It was deliberately aiming for people.
Yeah.
Over like a mile-long stretch.
It was.
And there were victims from all over the world, including a group of Argentinian friends celebrating their 30th high school reunion.
Wow.
That detail really got me.
Yeah, it really underscores the randomness of it all. And the global reach of this kind of attack. I mean, these friends are just living their lives, and suddenly they're caught up in this horrible act.
Yeah.
And Saipov, the driver, he didn't just lose control, you know? He crashed into a school bus at the end, jumped out, and started shouting, Allahu Akbar.
Oh, wow. That sends chills down my spine. Okay, so we have this event, but who is this guy? Like, before October 31st, Saipov was an Uzbek immigrant, had been living in the U.S. since 2010, worked as an Uber driver. Like, on paper, pretty ordinary life. So how does someone like that get radicalized?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the Wikipedia article touches on this idea of self-radicalization, which isn't, you know, just about stumbling onto some website.
Right.
It's a process, a gradual immersion into this extremist ideology, and often fueled by these online echo chambers and this sense of isolation or anger. Oh, yeah.
We see this in Saipov's case with that note pledging allegiance to ISIS that they found in the truck.
Right, right. And this brings us to, like, that whole challenge of lone wolf terrorism.
Right.
These aren't individuals, you know, taking orders from some central command. They're inspired by groups like ISIS, but they act independently, which makes them super difficult for, like, intelligence agencies to track.
Yeah, it's like trying to predict an earthquake. You know the fault lines are there.
Right.
But figuring out exactly when and where the ground's going to shake, it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
And actually, Saipov was interviewed by federal agents back in 2015.
Really?
Because of some possible ties to suspected terrorists.
So he was already on their radar.
Yeah, but no case was opened at the time. And this is where things get really complex, you know, when you think about law enforcement and intelligence gathering. Balancing individual rights with the need to prevent these potential attacks. It's a real tightrope walk. Like, what is enough evidence to justify surveillance or intervention? There's no easy answer. Yeah, it's a chilling thought that even with warning signs, something like this can still slip through the cracks. So after the attack, what happened to Saipov?
Well, the legal process was fairly straightforward. He was charged, pled guilty, and received a life sentence without parole. But the attack itself sparked this huge debate about the diversity immigrant visa program, which Saipov used to enter the U.S.
Oh, right. And it's important to unpack that a bit because it gets into some really sensitive issues. This program has been around for decades.
Right. Yeah.
With bipartisan support going back to like 1990.
Exactly. And the goal here isn't to take sides or anything.
Right.
But to really understand how a single event can just ignite these conversations about immigration policy and national security, Saipov's case became a focal point for those arguing to limit or completely abolish the program.
Which brings us to the immediate aftermath of the attack and the city's response. I remember those concrete barriers popping up all over the city, especially on the Greenway.
Yeah, those are the anti-vehicle bollards. They became a very common sight in New York and other cities after this attack. They're basically a physical deterrent to vehicle ramming attacks, you know, trying to create a barrier between vehicles and pedestrians.
Right. But it raises a bigger question, though, right?
Yeah.
How do you secure a city without turning it into a fortress? Where do you draw the line between safety and maintaining that open, vibrant feel that defines a place like New York?
It's a question with no easy solutions, really. It forces us to confront these trade-offs, you know, that are inherent in a free and open society. I mean, total security is an illusion.
Right.
And the pursuit of it can actually erode the very freedoms that we're trying to protect.
So we have this attack, this individual who seemingly came out of nowhere. And this city grappling with how to respond.
Mhm.
What I'm struggling with is understanding how someone like Saipuffle living a relatively normal life could be driven to do something so violent. Was it purely ideology? Was it something deeper, something more personal?
That's where we really need to delve deeper into the psychological factors at play here. With radicalization, it's rarely a single cause. It's more like a convergence of influences. Ideology, personal grievances, a sense of belonging that people find in these extremist groups. And in Saipov's case, the Wikipedia article mentions that he was really impacted by this video that he saw
Oh, really?
of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS.
So it wasn't just the ideology itself, but how it was presented.
Right.
The emotional pull of a charismatic leader like al-Baghdadi.
Exactly. It speaks to the power of propaganda, especially in the digital age, where extremist content is so readily accessible, and it raises questions about the role of tech companies in all of this,
Right.
trying to balance free speech with the need to prevent the spread of this harmful material.
Right. It's tricky. You don't want to stifle open dialogue.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want to be giving a platform to hate speech and incitements to violence.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act, and it's one that's constantly evolving as technology advances and the tactics of these extremist groups change. But I think the main takeaway here is the need for critical thinking, media literacy, and the ability to tell the difference between credible information and propaganda. We can't just rely on algorithms or tech companies to filter out all the bad stuff.
Right.
We have to be active participants in shaping the online landscape.
Absolutely. We have a responsibility to be informed and discerning,
Yeah.
especially in the digital age.
Yeah.
Be aware of how these platforms can be used to manipulate and exploit.
Precisely. And I think that awareness needs to extend beyond the online world as well. We need to be attuned to the signs of radicalization in our own communities.
Yeah.
Be willing to have those difficult conversations and to challenge these extremist views when we encounter them.
It's about creating a culture of vigilance, not in a paranoid sense, but in a way that encourages open dialogue and challenges these harmful ideologies before they can really take root, but without, turning into Big Brother.
Exactly. Finding that balance between security and freedom, about empowering communities without resorting to these really authoritarian measures.
So we've talked about the attack, the perpetrator, the immediate aftermath, and some of the bigger societal questions this brings up. But what about the human cost? Like the lasting impact on the people who actually live through this?
That's where the Wikipedia article, while it's very informative, kind of falls short. It provides the statistics, the names of the victims, but it can't really capture the individual stories of loss and resilience and that long process of healing that follows a traumatic event like this.
Yeah, you're right. We can't lose sight of the actual people behind those numbers. 8 people killed, 12 injured. I mean, each one of those is a life that's been shattered, a family that's grieving. And then you think about all the people beyond those immediate victims, right? Like the ripple effect on the entire community.
Oh, absolutely. Think about all the people who witnessed it. The first responders who had to rush into all that chaos. The people living in the neighborhood where it happened. The trauma, the fear, that sense of vulnerability. Those are wounds that take a long time to heal.
Yeah, for sure. The Wikipedia article mentions that the Halloween parade was actually scheduled to take place just a few blocks away from the attack. And it went ahead as planned. Like Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo even marched in it. What do you make of that decision?
Well, I think it was a powerful statement of defiance, It's like refusing to let terrorism dictate their lives.
Right.
It also really speaks to the resilience of New Yorkers. Yeah, there was increased security, of course, but just that decision to proceed with a celebration of life.
Right.
In the face of something so tragic, it sends a really strong message.
It's like saying you might have terrorized us, but you haven't broken us. But going back to the idea of preventing these lone wolf attacks.
Yeah.
If those traditional intelligence gathering methods aren't always effective, are there other approaches that might be more promising?
Well, one area that's been getting a lot of attention is this idea of community engagement and intervention.
Okay.
It's about building trust between law enforcement and communities, encouraging people to report if they see any suspicious behavior, or individuals who they think might be headed down a path towards radicalization.
So it's not just about relying on the government. It's about empowering people to play a role in their own safety.
Exactly.
But isn't that kind of a slippery slope? Where's the line between vigilance and paranoia? Between reporting legitimate concerns and profiling people based on their religion or their background.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance for sure, and it requires a lot of careful consideration of the ethical and legal boundaries.
Hmm.
The goal isn't to create a society where everyone's suspicious of each other, but to really foster a sense of shared responsibility, for preventing violence, recognizing that we all have a role to play in keeping our communities safe.
Okay, so it's complex. It definitely deserves like a whole deep dive on its own. But going back to the attack itself, the choice of target, the Hudson River Greenway, was that purely symbolic? Or was there something more strategic about it?
I think it's probably a combination of factors. Symbolically, the Greenway represents the vibrancy and openness of New York City. So attacking it kind of strikes at the heart of what makes the city so appealing.
Yeah.
But then there's also that practical element. It's a relatively soft target. It's a crowded public space, not a lot of security measures in place.
Right, and the article mentions that there were actually calls for increased security on the Greenway even before the attack.
Really?
Yeah, particularly after a couple of fatal vehicular accidents back in 2006.
That's interesting. And that's a crucial point, I think. Often it takes a tragedy like this to expose the vulnerabilities that were already there. So the question is, how do we learn from these events
Right.
and start to proactively address those security risks before they result in people getting hurt or killed?
Yeah.
It's a huge challenge for cities all over the world, balancing security with the need to preserve those public spaces and that freedom of movement.
It's a balancing act, for sure,
Yeah.
and one that requires constant evaluation and adaptation.
Speaking of adaptation, how did the city's response to the impact evolve over time?
Well, the initial reaction, as you can imagine, was focused on those immediate security measures, like those concrete barriers that we talked about earlier.
Right.
But as time went on, the city really adopted a more comprehensive approach, incorporating those physical security enhancements, but also community-based initiatives.
Can you give me some examples of those initiatives?
Yeah.
Sure. So the city invested in these more robust and aesthetically pleasing bollards, along the whole length of the Greenway, not just the area where the attack happened.
Right.
They also had a bunch of public awareness campaigns to encourage vigilance and reporting suspicious activity. And there was a really big push to build stronger relationships between law enforcement and community organizations, especially the ones that serve immigrant populations.
So it sounds like they recognize that security isn't just about physical barriers, but also about fostering a sense of community and shared responsibility.
Exactly. Recognizing that the most effective strategies have to have multiple layers. Incorporating those physical measures, but also social interventions and empowering communities to actually be part of the solution, not just passive recipients of these top-down policies.
Makes sense. So we've talked about that immediate aftermath, the security measures that debate around immigration. But what about the long-term impact on the community, on the people who live and work near where it happened?
Yeah, that's an aspect that often gets overlooked in these discussions. The psychological scars, the lingering fear, the unease. These are invisible wounds that can take years, even decades to fully heal.
Wow.
Imagine walking down the same street where a terrorist attack happened, knowing that your world can change in an instant.
It's a powerful reminder that these events aren't just isolated incidents. They have this ripple effect that goes way beyond those immediate victims in the news cycle. It's also a reminder that security isn't just about preventing those attacks.
Yeah.
It's about creating a sense of safety and well-being for everyone in the community.
Absolutely. And that sense of safety isn't just about physical protection. It's about feeling connected to your community, knowing that you have support systems, believing that your voice actually matters, in shaping the policies that affect your life. It's about fostering that sense of belonging and resilience in the face of whatever happens.
Yeah, it's about rebuilding that feeling, that feeling of normalcy, that sense of security that was so shattered on that Halloween day.
And as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into this attack using this Wikipedia article, I think it's important to remember that any single source, it has its limitations.
Oh, for sure. This article gives us a really good foundation for understanding what happened.
Yeah.
But it can't possibly tell the whole story, the individual experiences of everyone who was affected. We know that 8 people were killed. The article lists their names, their nationalities. But it doesn't tell us anything about who they were, what their lives were like.
Exactly. Those are the stories that really bring home the true cost of something like this. I mean, we can talk about all the security measures and the political debates, but at the end of the day, it's the human impact that really matters.
And that's why it's so important for us to go beyond just the headlines,
Mhm.
to seek out those personal narratives, to understand the ripple effects on families, communities, even entire countries.
It's those stories that help us to build empathy, to see beyond just the statistics and connect with the actual human beings who are affected.
For example, I was reading this article about this young woman who was riding her bike on the Greenway that day. She survived, but she was really badly injured, physically and emotionally. It took her months of physical therapy just to be able to walk again, and even longer to deal with the trauma of what happened. She talks about the guilt she felt for surviving when others didn't, the fear of being in crowds, the nightmares that she had for months.
Wow. Her story is such a powerful reminder that the impact of terrorism goes way beyond that initial event. The physical scars might heal, but the psychological ones can last for years.
And it shows how important it is to support survivors, not just right after an attack, but for the long haul. We need to make sure they have what they need to heal, both physically and emotionally.
Right, and that includes the families of those who were killed too. Their lives are changed forever. They need our compassion and support as they grieve and try to rebuild their lives.
And we can't forget about the first responders, the police officers, firefighters, paramedics who were there that day. They saw it all firsthand. They're often the unsung heroes in these situations, and they can experience trauma too.
Absolutely. Their bravery is incredible. And we need to make sure that they have the support and resources they need to cope with the emotional toll of their work. Thinking about the long-term effects of this attack and really any act of terrorism, it's easy to get caught up in the darkness, the senselessness of it all. But I also see hope, in the resilience of people.
Me too. I mean, after this attack, we saw New Yorkers coming together to support each other, to honor the victims, to rebuild their community. We saw people all over the world expressing their solidarity, refusing to let fear and hatred win.
It's a good reminder that even when faced with something so horrible, there's always hope, there's always love, and people are strong. We can overcome and build a better future.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. It's that spirit of resilience, that determination to choose hope, that gives me faith in humanity. And if you're listening and you want to dig deeper into the stories of the people affected by this attack, I encourage you to go beyond just this Wikipedia article. There are tons of news articles, documentaries, personal accounts that give you a more intimate look at the human side of this tragedy. Remember, there's always more to learn.
Always. And the more we learn, the better we understand. And that helps us build a world where things like this happen less and less.
Well, that's our deep dive into the 2017 NYC truck attack. We hope this has given you a better understanding of this complex event. But more importantly, we hope it's made you curious to learn more, to connect with those human stories, and to think critically about the challenges we face together as a society. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.